So, shooting in the wind is one of the most important parts of competition, kind of shooting and preparation. Today, I'm joined by Mike Peart again to talk about this. So, thank you for joining me, Mike.
My pleasure.
So, I wanted to talk about wind shooting because in my community, someone asked this question the other day, and I started thinking about it, and I thought, yes, I could make a video on this, but it would be even better if I've got your opinion as well, because we can talk about other techniques, maybe that you've got a lot more experience than me, other techniques that I've not covered, and maybe
Okay.
touch on a little bit with compound as well. So let's start. I'm going to bring up the question here that someone asked so people can see. So I'll kind of paraphrase it a little bit, but they said, I'm an amateur competitive recurver, 35-pound draw weight, shooting 70 meters. My scores drop a lot more in gusty conditions, so 25 to 30 mile an hour wind, without a fixed direction of the wind, because obviously this is quite different to, shooting just like a 5-10 mile an hour consistent breeze. You just aim off and kind of get on with your life, basically, with that one.
Yeah, this one is a bit different and a bit more challenging for sure.
Yeah. So they've said, how can I train better? 4 parts I could think of, and I appreciate your feedback. Drills. So, for example, they mentioned the feet together shooting drill that I've mentioned before, which is for like swaying. Strength and conditioning. What core exercise would you recommend? Building up draw weight gradually and having heavier arrows? Question mark. Techniques. Should I speed up my shooting, or should I just focus on specific steps, such as bow arm and strong execution? And mental, like mentally, how do I prepare for gusty conditions and anything else I might have missed? So there's quite
Well,
a
they
lot
put
here.
together a
Yeah,
really good question there, and they've clearly put some thought into it, and they're clearly they're on the right path as well. None of those topics are completely wrong, are they?
yeah, exactly. So I think let's start with the drills, and we can talk about a little bit kind of. They've mentioned obviously the drill of putting the feet together, which is I think is fine, but not overly specific to that gusty condition shooting. I think that's going to be the challenge, isn't it? Because, for example, you've done aiming off drills where you shoot the whole round aiming in the blue, you move your
Yeah.
sight so that the arrows go in the gold. That's fine, but that's not really going to help this specific gusty wind, is it?
No, and leg together training, I'll admit, never done it in my life.
Yeah.
That's your speciality. That's not something I've tried. I need to put that on my list. But yeah, the gusty wind is so much harder for me. As soon as I read that, the tool that immediately springs to mind for me is because you can't move your sight because it's changing. But the number one thing for me is to speed up the shot
Yeah.
and really pick your moments. I know sometimes it's hard to find that still patch of time, but there normally is. There is moments in there, and that's when you need to commit and get the shot done. And if you get
Exactly.
blown off, I'd literally stop, come back onto the target, and then sometimes commit and start again. It's not ideal, but it's a windy day. It's not an ideal day.
Yeah. And this is the thing, I think, so the drills are good, but it's hard to practice that being blown around like that. So I would definitely, we've kind of jumped to the techniques, obviously, but the speeding up the shot, I think, is like the number one thing. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the mental side a little bit as well, which we'll probably touch on. But essentially, being okay with more sight float than you think is acceptable. And I think this is where people get really kind of caught up when you're aiming at the gold. Everyone is fairly comfortable with the sight float being within, let's say, if it's a little bit windy, maybe within the 8, maybe if it's quite windy within the 7. People are kind of mentally okay with that. And this is, I think you were probably taught this from Lord Brown, Lord Brown, from Lloyd Brown as well. But when you're then aiming off, as well as that, people forget that one color band is actually the width of the 10. So if you're aiming, I'm going to aim blue right, that width is the same as the 10. And considering that when you're aiming off that far, it's a windy day, you're never going to be able to keep your sight within that blue.
No,
So
it's
actually,
going to be
even
moving.
within
You're
the
going to be
gold,
seeing some black and red in there for sure.
yeah. So this is where people get caught up and they try to over aim in gusty conditions because they're like, oh, but my sight's going from, yeah, like you said, red to black. I can't shoot now, and then that is what causes the kind of issues. Have you had experience with when it's gusty conditions? What's your tactic in terms of waiting for the wind and that kind of thing. Because I think this is like one of the biggest parts to this as well, is like the strategy of that.
Yeah, I want to heads up say I never felt like I was a master at it. And I don't necessarily think anyone does. We're all struggling, we're all
Yeah,
learning, and it's just something you just deal with. And it's very rarely that I feel like, oh, yes, I'm a master of the wind today. It's
yeah,
always a bit of a fight. And I think what you just touched on there a little bit as well is about, setting yourself realistic expectations is probably the most important thing for the day, and not because getting overly frustrated, there's a difference between motivation and frustration, and getting frustrated with your performance isn't going to help anything. And as you were talking there, it reminded me of a little story about Marco Galeazzo when he
yeah,
won the Olympics. So it was 2004, was he, in
yeah.
Athens? Yes. That was a windy Olympics. The match
It was,
play
yeah.
was super windy. I
Athens,
remember
yeah.
on the first few rounds, there wasn't a single match I could find where the athletes hadn't shot blacks,
Nice.
arrows in the blacks. And this is an Olympic Games. So we're not talking about a gentle left to right breeze.
Yeah,
We're talking about a gusty breeze. And one of the key things that him and his coach worked on at the time, and their message for the whole day, all the way through to the Olympic final and to winning the gold medal, was all he wanted to do is be within the gold. His coach wouldn't tell him, oh, it was a 9 to the left, or it was a 10. If it was a gold, it was well done, awesome, high five, next shot.
yeah,
So normally someone who's there trying to hit tens were off the menu. They were just trying to shoot golds, and there was no other feedback than, yes, you got it. And I
yeah,
think that led for him having a much more positive mindset for the day, and far more often feeling like he was getting a pat on the back, and he was getting the upper hand on the wind. Whereas, or normally telling an international world class archer, oh, you got 3 nines to the left, that's
move your sight or aim
that's
off. Yeah,
negative for them. Whereas he just went in with the approach of, yeah, if you shoot a gold, you're on the money. And on the day, that was enough to deliver him success. So setting realistic expectations and working out immediately what is reasonable, because there's no point keeping your goals if I'm going to shoot 55 ends if you're shooting 45 ends all day. So I think that was just popped into my head there as being a real classic example of trying to have the best approach to a windy day.
I think that's such a great point. And this gold thing comes up so often because this is exactly. There's a great Korean documentary of I think it was the 2016 selection for the Rio Games, and it was kind of this kind of artsy looking documentary they did on, I think it was KBS in Korea, following the selection shoot. And it zoomed in. There was one day that it was windy, and it zoomed into Kibo Bay sat down with her notebook preparing for the day, and the translation of whatever she'd wrote
Mm.
and was reading was something along the lines of, "When the wind blows, just aim for the goal." Like exactly this thing. It's such a common thing that a lot of people. I know Simon Terry used to say this a lot as well. He was never really fussed about like shooting 10. It sounds weird at 70 meters because
Yes.
he shot like 680s and stuff like that. But you ask a lot of top archers this, and even sometimes in calmer conditions, they almost forget about those tens. I asked Kim
Yeah.
Woo-jin the same thing. We were in Shanghai in the stadium shooting the qualification. He'd just shot 694. The wind was like a little bit breezy,
Yeah,
something,
that can be
not
challenging in the
crazy.
stadium there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I asked him afterwards, like, what his mindset was, and he said exactly the same thing. He said, I was just trying to shoot golds. And I was like, well, you shot more than like 60% tens. But okay.
So we
Yeah.
want to be clear. These are athletes who normally shoot tens,
Yeah.
so they're happy with the gold. So for you, a good shot
Exactly.
is a gold. Then maybe for the day, you're like, anything in the red, thumbs
Yeah.
up.
Exactly
And
that.
that's about setting realistic, so at least you can feel like you're winning. You might not win every time, but you've got a chance. So it keeps it on a positive feeling and keeps it a challenge rather than just a defeat.
Exactly. And it doesn't, it kind of allows you that relaxation with your aiming as well, doesn't it? Because it's like, I'm only kind of aiming for this. Shoot a decent shot, keep them. And sometimes it might sound crazy. I've had tournaments, you've probably had this as well, where you're like, I'm just going to keep it within the blue. It's so windy today. I'm just going to like keep it within the blue. and that's I've even been to a tournament. It was the World Champs in 2013. I think probably the windiest tournament maybe in the history of World Championships. I don't know, but it was the windiest I've ever been to the point where your sight is going to the other target onto like to the side.
Where was this?
That was in Belek in Turkey,
Fair
and it
enough.
was ridiculously windy. I remember in the head-to-heads, I aimed at the backing by accident. I shot an arrow, not even aiming at the target, and it still hit the target.
You
um,
you saying
yeah,
this reminds me the windiest shoot I ever done was a European Championship in Athens on top of a hill. Great
they
archery
keep doing it in
location.
Athens, right? Yeah.
And I remember at the time one of my compound teammates, Liam Grimwood, he was currently one of the top world ranked archers, and I think he'd just done a 700 and something the week before. And on the bus, I said, "Oh, what do you think you're going to get today?" And he said, "Today, I'm aiming for 665." And I laughed. And he said, "No, no, I'm aiming for 665 because I think if I get 665, I'm going to be one of the best in Europe." And he was serious about it. And I remember he either got 664 or 666. His prediction was so good, and I can't remember if he was first, second, or third, but he was right. It sounded ridiculous. I don't think there was anyone else on that field who'd set a goal of 565,
Yeah,
but
or
his
665.
assessment
Yeah,
of the conditions was perfect, and that put him, he knew that'd be enough, and yeah, that put him in the top three. It may have even put him number one. I can't remember. But
yeah,
that was a great example of a professional archer assessing the conditions, lowering his target, and then feeling like he achieved something and actually probably got the best performance he could for the conditions. Because when you get your world championship or European championship medal, it doesn't say on the back of it, yeah, but it was really windy, so the score was bad. A medal is a medal, a qualifying position is a position. Once the day is over, no one cares about the score.
yeah. That's exactly true, and that nicely brings us on to kind of the next point about kind of the strategy as well. So we mentioned earlier about kind of obviously the aiming off and maybe picking your moments. And one thing I wanted to kind of bring up here, so I found a picture that I want to show, which is really important to find a reliable marker on the field that you can use that is upwind. So I know you're familiar with this as well, but I just wanted to kind of really make sure people see this. And what I mean by upwind is let's take this is just a simple picture here. Where's it gone? Somewhere down here. And
No, they've hidden
no,
it for you.
it's disappeared. Yeah, so we'll just use it on this page. But let's take it, for example, these targets here. If the wind is going left to right, you do not want to pick a flag that's on the right because that's telling you what the wind has done before, not what it's about to do. So this is what I mean when I say like pick an upwind indicator, because then you're basically seeing what the wind's about to do. And while
Yes,
you're shooting, you've had this as well, I'm sure, but
absolutely.
while you're shooting in the competition, you want to pick one that's far enough away that's going to kind of tell you in advance what the wind's going to do. Because if I go back now, just to us with the screen, but if you're shooting in the wind and you really pay attention, it does come in waves. And this is what you mentioned earlier, right? It kind of comes in, there'll be a gust and a lull, gust and a lull. And then maybe I'll just make it up, 5 minutes, there might be a period where there's, a small bit where there's like not that much wind. So if you're just being aware, picking the right indicators, and often for 70 meters, you've probably found this as well, but the 50-meter flag on the compound targets can be like really, really useful if it's on the
It's a good
correct
position,
side.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's about picking these indicators and using them. And sometimes, I don't know I'll be interested to hear your experience with this. Sometimes I'll pick an indicator in the morning, do my practice ends, and I'll find out this indicator is completely garbage. Like it's literally every time this blows left, the arrows go the other way because maybe you're in a stadium or the field or whatever.
Yeah.
So sometimes you have to sacrifice a few arrows as well to find the
Yeah.
indicator that's actually reliable and then kind of go through that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Couldn't agree more. And it's also one of their advantages, and one of the things I like about the bigger their event you go to, the more opportunities you get to find a solution, because hopefully you'll have a practice day the day before, so you're getting to shoot there at the same time of day in the same position to find that marker, try and see what you can get feedback from. And it's not in the rules or anything, but generally speaking, the bigger the event, the more they like to put flags up. So generally, the bigger the event you go to, the more things. If you've got an Olympic field, it will have a row of flags along it, or a European Championship field. They always put up the flags, and then you go to a local shoot, and you might only just have the flag on top of your target. So it's one of those things, trying to find something to give you that feedback. And yeah, normally the bigger the event, the more opportunities there are to find something that's going to work for you. But
Yeah,
again, it's not going to work perfect. Sometimes you're going to get it wrong. It's just dealing with the situation and making the best out of a situation.
definitely. And would you say with that kind of wind shooting, we touched on speed a little bit earlier. Would you say in terms of your technique, would you change anything in terms of how you're expanding or how aggressive you're being in terms of possibly directing into the target a bit more with the front arm?
Oh, it just feels like everything's sort of turned up to 10. It's so much more punchy, but sometimes it will be, I'll draw up, the wind will come, and I will, even though it's not desirable, I will stay at full draw waiting for the wind to die down, and then back on target, execute. I feel like you have to turn everything up to 11 or you'll end up doing a soft shot. And none of these things are going to help you shoot a personal best, and they probably mean the next day, if there's no wind, you definitely won't shoot a personal best, because they're all chipping away at a high scoring technique. But you just need to get the best result you can on the day, and that's all I can really say. But turning everything up, you're better to overpower it, because the tendency is you'll go soft, you'll underpower.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more with that. So to kind of, I guess, summarize that, I'd say for people, it basically, if you feel like you're at 100% normally, feel like you kind of like double that effort on the draw side and on the bow hand
Yeah.
side to essentially like really get an aggressive shot. And also what I'd say with the speed, so some drills people can do for this is basically feeling like they're really doing an aggressive shot. So that's one drill. And you can obviously doing bow training. I think bow training, speed drills where they're doing an aggressive shot, and then speed shooting drills are going to be some good takeaways for this person and anyone watching. And what I mean by speed shooting is maybe you won't be able to do this immediately, but like 6 arrows in 90 seconds or 3 arrows in 45 seconds, because there's going to be times, aren't there, where there's like 40 seconds of calm. And if you can shoot 3 arrows in that, you've got a huge advantage compared to someone else to
Huge.
get them
And
off.
it's just having that, being able to be flexible. The more control you can have over your shooting within that block of time, the more options it gives you. And yes, of course, some of us end up with 3 arrows in our quiver and there's only 25 seconds left. Your options are gone. You just have to shoot them. But it's about making your shooting as flexible as possible so you've got the most chance. That's part of the reason why I really don't like it when my athletes have a long sort of pre-draw routine. If any of them, some of them like to stretch their head, or I like to keep the shot as short and as simple as
Absolutely.
possible, because someone with that longer pre-draw routine, they just really suffer on the windy days.
Yeah, yeah, most definitely. Because it's hard to quickly take advantage of that lull in the wind, isn't it?
Yes, it really is.
And I guess a kind of final closing thing I wanted to touch on is the difference between like a tail or a headwind versus a crosswind. Because obviously the crosswind technically is harder to deal with in terms of being buffeted around, but people might not realize that a tailwind or a headwind can sometimes like kick the arrow off a lot more than they realize. Um, so to kind of close with that, I'd say I don't think we touched on it quite yet, but if you do a soft shot and your aim is like pretty good, red or gold, and it's windy, you're going to get murdered by the wind because the arrow comes out the bow and it's slightly wonky, and then the wind hits it, and then you get a black. But if you do a really strong shot that, like Mike was talking about earlier, and you're aiming in the blue, you're probably going to get a good shot still, because your brain is clever and it's going to try and move that aiming towards the gold as you shoot,
Yeah.
and you're going to get a decent result. So this is what we were alluding to earlier. And this is kind of even more I've found with a tailwind, because with the tailwind, it's really kicking that back of the arrow
Okay.
out. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on with the tailwind with that, but I guess we tended to
I didn't
mostly
have
have crosswinds.
I always felt I struggled with the aim, and I always felt with both my recurve and my compound career, if I could have my sight on the middle, I could get it in the middle.
Yeah,
So for me, I never really suffered. I had some tournaments where we had a headwind, and I just had a really difficult time with just I was just crying all day because the wind was in my face and
oh
just
yeah,
constantly. And that I actually was one of the most. It was a really tough day because constantly I'd be at full draw and my eyes were just watering up because it's constantly getting blown in my face. But from behind, personally, I didn't really have an issue with it. I don't know whether it was my higher poundage
that could be
just helped me in that situation, but for me, it wasn't a problem. It was just the left and right trying to keep myself stable and
centered.
keep my aim. Maybe it's been, maybe I didn't have the best alignment and the best strength. So that was my weakness. The left and right was the thing that I knew I had to work on.
Get the really strong shots. I think this has been great. I think this is a really good kind of summary. So to kind of give people things to take away: bow strength, speed shooting drills,
Yeah.
executing the shot stronger, and then changing your mindset, kind of mentally adjust where you are with, what your goal is for the day and where you're happy with your sight float. Those are going to be the main things. And then having the
Yeah.
strategy, picking your aiming spot, picking your moments to shoot, and then getting a reliable indicator is going to be what you want to do.
And just make the best of the day you're given. That's all you got to do. You
Yeah.
don't have to shoot a world record.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. This has been great. Thanks a lot again, Mike, for coming.
Enjoyable. Have a good day.
You too.